All right. Hi, Patterson.
Hello, River Roberts. All right.
Long time. Shall we kick this off with a
See,
little
you're
bit of
copying me today with your outfit.
weekly check-in? Well, if you actually look back, I've been pretty consistent with my choice in, I think, even this exact shirt. So I do have other shirts and I do wash this between podcasts. But I'm glad you
Okay,
finally got the memo on this. Let's jump straight into the weekly check-in.
weekly check-in. Sounds good.
Any news
So
jump out for
we
you this week?
got we got a few pieces of news. Yeah,
Yeah.
the things that are really interesting are kind of like the bigger picture pieces to me. Like I think a lot about
Mm.
like, oh yeah, this news is um the how do I frame this? The news cycle is very consistent and it needs to be consistent to have people constantly engaged. It's their business model, but that news doesn't always mean that it's like groundbreaking. And I think a lot of the
Mhm.
time the is actually these days more groundbreaking than it has been in other quieter periods and for different people for different reasons. One of the things that jumped out to me was I read that the UAE is committing to having 50% of their government processes AI or specifically agentic AI run within 2 years, which
Did they give specifics on like what decisions or what constituted as like running?
no, they didn't give details. The like high level of it is that it was like services and operations. And if you think about it, it's like, and I'll caveat this by saying that I don't work in government. I'm not a part of this, but I am I'm a voter and I'm a participant. We know that there's big lag between what tech
Hmm.
does or what people do, what companies do, and what gets legislated. And the number I understand is like usually around lagging by a decade. So you have like all of this innovation and then eventually governments start to put rules around it.
Hmm.
So like this 2 year timeline is pretty interesting. I think that in normal terms, it would be like, whoa, no government can do that in 2 years. But given the urgency and also given the nature of the tools, I would say that 2 years is maybe even too long. Hard to know. It ties into all of these things that I've been thinking about a lot. Like, what is this adoption? What does this adoption look like? How does the technology get distributed, and how does it get distributed evenly, and so that everybody benefits from it?
Yeah, actually, I heard something. I heard an analogy this week about medicine and how medicine is received in different parts of your body in different ways. It's fundamentally absorbed differently. And it strikes me that,
Hmm.
some of these tools and breakthroughs, even thinking outside of just mere distribution, it's like, how do they actually get absorbed within society? And like one of the pieces of news that's kind of been jumping out for me this week is in America, you've got a bunch of bans on uses of AI. So New York State, for instance, you can't get AI legal advice, which is, I think you
Yeah.
can't get AI legal advice or financial advice, which is like, I don't know how you make that illegal. And then I just saw a small piece on Maryland in the States that's actually banned AI price driven increases in grocery stores. And, these are
Wait, can you,
small. So
what does that mean?
the state of Maryland has banned so in a grocery aisle, you will see the prices go up and down. And those
Yeah.
prices in the state of Maryland are not allowed to be dictated by AI pricing structure. So they've
Wow.
banned that part of it. So that's part of like AI safety and AI fairness in commerce or something. So it's interesting to see how these tools are starting to have boundaries um, put on them, but not in what I would say particularly intelligent ways. And then, compare that with the UAE, that's kind of like, all right, we're going to absorb it all as much as possible. Curious to see how that kind of goes, particularly when you've seen like, what was it this week where entire company's database was deleted in 9 seconds? Did you see that piece?
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
No.
it was a company that supported a car rental business, and so basically its entire database was wiped by an agent in 9 seconds, and largely it was kind of user error in terms of not quite setting up the right permissions and things like that. And I haven't done a deep dive on what the postmortem was, but yeah, I think we're going to see a few more of those cases happening when you have enterprise trying to adopt the technology that isn't quite ready and they haven't necessarily done the work to set up the systems in parallel to make sure that there's a safe backup as well. So apparently this also deleted all the backups. So yeah, this guy obviously had a really rough day. Whoever was looking after that.
So
What other news jumped out at you this week?
just to touch back on this piece of regulation in different areas, it's not surprising because like we've got this technology that there are people that are saying that it will replace like all of white collar work, and every single industry will have its own immune system response. It will go, no, we don't want these jobs to be cannibalized, and they will have different kind of levers for pushing back against this. And especially, I think, healthcare, law, there will be some areas that have like a really strong immune system response. And depending on like the robustness of the jurisdiction that they're in, there'll be different
regulatory environment.
Kind of,
yeah.
And it's crazy because it's a technology that like can just leapfrog a bunch of kind of industries or jurisdictions forward. So I think really you're only handicapping yourself by restricting it. But it's like there's a similar thing with immigration in that it's not bad for a country to have a lot of people migrating to it from an economic standpoint. But where it gets hard is that if too many people come quickly and there's not enough infrastructure to support that many people, you get all of these like really difficult, like just the time scales of say building houses and building transport systems versus how quick it is to get on a plane and move to a place. That's really where the like migration friction is, along with like cultural things of like one culture come and imposing their culture on a new place if there are too many new people. Like they're all of these kind of pieces that interplay. And I see that the same with these AI regulations is that AI is moving really, really quickly, and the speed at which people can adapt their roles and adapt their jobs and adapt all of these professions is probably where we're going to see a lot of friction.
Yeah, and I think the immune response is a great way of positioning it as well. Yeah, kind of works with the analogy of how medicine isn't necessarily received evenly. Yeah. And
yeah,
there's kind of two other kind of signals of news that came through this week that I actually found kind of competing in many ways. So you had some incredible earnings calls for basically all of the mega scalers, and Amazon, Google, OpenAI, all of these had incredible earnings calls, and then the open weight models are just again breaking so much ground. What is that? Is that a seagull? Can you do it again? We've momentarily lost sight to some unknown white, fast-moving object. I guess it's technically a UAP.
The idea of the curtain's really nice. The functional nature of having curtains in wind that reach you from a long way away.
So it's a curtain call already. All right. No, not at all. Not at all. No, I was just like, I think there's this real interesting tension in the industry right now where you've got, these hyperscalers that are reporting these incredible earning calls and raising. I mean, I think OpenAI has now raised $4 billion. And yet these open weight models kind of largely led by the Chinese, but Google's been releasing some great open weight models, and DeepSeek just released another great one. And it seems, at least what I'm seeing on the ground, is more and more of the maybe smaller upstarts are starting to route their inference through these open weight models as much as possible so that their token usage is much more efficient. The difference between a frontier model 6 months ago versus today versus the open weight models, like it's a much smaller gap. Yeah, there's the use cases that actually really require those leading edge frontier models, and obviously in medical advancements and maybe some of the deep engineering aspects that are going into space. But even then, because these are generative systems, the accuracy on them is often lacking in a certain reliability. But yeah, those two news stories kind of, it feels like there's some tension emerging there. What else jumped out at you this week?
Interesting. Well, like one of my news stories, the seagull's back. One of my news stories is kind of addressing this. Like, I think I think you're right that these open weight models will be used more and more. And like, it's a threshold thing, right? I'm not going to use an AI I'm not going to use a tool that is fundamentally not good enough. But once it reaches a certain threshold to do a certain thing, then why wouldn't I use the cheaper version unless I like need the most intelligent model? The news story that jumped out at me was kind of related to this distribution thing, or this like these large frontier models backing up their value, which is that both Anthropic and OpenAI have launched joint ventures with big Wall Street firms, and these are specifically for like B2B customer acquisition. It seems like the players, they're like raising money from Sequoia and Goldman Sachs and all of these large investors, and within these portfolio companies, or like within these investment companies, their portfolio of companies is huge, and to compete, you can compete like in one level, kind of like cold outreach, or, you know, building sales relationships, or you can also get those customers by partnering with their investors and having all of these capital flows feed back into themselves. So it's a really smart play from these large models, and it's kind of, I don't want to say business 101, but it makes sense that this is the way that capital is structuring itself, money is structuring itself, to have all of these companies have an inside person saying, hey, you should use this company because XYZ. Because it's true that these smaller models are getting smarter and smarter, and actually at a disproportionate rate. Like the larger models are getting faster, but also like there's technology that's understood that allows us to shrink these models down and get like really good outputs at a fraction of a cost. Yeah. Those are the two that kind of jumped out at me. And it also made me realize that people learn relatively slowly. There's a neuroscience stat that you can only really absorb 2 new behaviors at a time. You can only really learn 2 new things at a time. This number of like 21 days to learn a new habit is more like 60 in the real world. So like, we're not learning new things at a particularly quick rate as individuals, you know?
Yeah, or collectively. And you know, one of the pieces I keep kind of reflecting on, and I actually knew this guy from when I used to live in Hong Kong, and his name is Kai, and he's actually written a book called Raising AI, which is all about parenting AIs. And you know, the values and the virtues that we're embedding in the way that we're doing business and building these tools it has really compounding aspects here. And it really feels like there's just like the numbers that have been thrown around in terms of capital invested, and it just like it seems ridiculous in the whole scale of things. And then when you compare that to, you know, the price to run certain social systems or medical systems in certain countries or certain parts of the world, it's like, yeah, what was it? I think it's Anthropic and OpenAI already make up a couple percent of the GDP of America, and that's within 2 years.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's crazy.
So the scale at which these are emerging, and the consolidation of resources is fascinating. But you know, one of the perspectives of that is that also, you know, this is really a race for these technologies to become a commodity, so that everyone actually really benefits from them. And that the underlying business model, the investment model for the entire industry is potentially flawed in that case, because if you've got kind of ubiquitous kind of commodity level usage of systems and tools like this, then there isn't necessarily these huge upsides that a lot of these companies are looking for. So that's where we start to look at, is this industry in a bubble, when to invest, when to pull out. And I think that also is relevant for builders as well. Like, at what stage do you build in the cycle? It's like, what stage of the wave are we at? Are we still pedaling just to catch the wave, or are we already on the wave right now of the tsunami, trying to ride this thing as it's like crashing all over? Yeah.
Oh man, we're so on the wave.
This is of it, yeah.
I get it. And I agree. The industry is, I think it's kind of pricing itself correctly, actually. I just think that the fundamentally having compounding, trying to have compounding returns on a finite planet is a difficult thing to
Yeah.
do or is an impossible thing to do. But if you look at like AI potentially taking, I'm pausing myself because it won't be proportional, but I'll just put like incorrect numbers on there. Like say we take the UAE and you take the spend of the UAE government and you take half of that and put it towards some kind of technology that runs half of the government. So you keep the spend the same and then you just divert half of it to be run by a computer, essentially. That is a massive budget, and that's just one country and one thing, and government sectors often require a lot more capital than other places. So it's not, I don't think it's that these companies are undervalued. I think overvalued. I think actually they're probably undervalued because everybody is not understanding how much this technology could change everything. I think there's a fundamental disconnect in like how long everything will take and whether or not it will actually happen. Like we potentially have this opportunity to choose. Oh, we would like these things to be done by a computer, but we don't want these parts to be done by a computer. And there's so many different kind of facets to it. I think you introduced me to Nate Higgins, who does the podcast The Great Simplification, which is fantastic and a fantastic way of like taking these really complex things and trying to distill them into a format that you can have a conversation about.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. Absolutely. I highly recommend listening for anyone that hasn't heard of The Great Simplification. Yeah. Shall we move to tools, or are there any other news bits that jumped out at you?
Let's move to tools. I'm sure there are parts that have come out, but they usually get prompted. I don't know if your brain works like this. I will not know what is going to come to mind, and then something will prompt it, and I go, "Oh, that's right."
So I'm a massive fan of alliteration, and I think that's part of like my like deep dad pun jokey kind of thing. And I don't know about you, but I grew up watching, what was it called, like Home Improvement with Tim the Toolman Taylor. And I feel like Ty's tool time is just waiting for the segment to this segment to emerge. So we've got the weekly chicken, and then the Ty's tool time.
I'm all about Ty's tool time.
How about you? How about you start off with tools? What
Would
tools
you like
have you been exploring? Definitely need a jingle for
I've been exploring. I went and used OpenAI's new image generation thing after you suggested it last week. It's really good these days. It's really good at making little tweaks. It's gone from a tool that's like, that's not quite good enough for me to get something that I want to use, to like, oh no, I can go and spend 2 or 3 minutes using this and get something that is 80% of the way there to like what I imagine I could get out of it. It's worth my time now, which is hard to say because I test a lot of tools and I basically scrap all of them. So I've been using
actually,
that.
Just on that quickly, how do you test a tool? And then how do you decide when to scrap it or move on to the next tool?
It kind of happens naturally for me. And I wish I could say that I have a more systematic way to do it. Usually
intuitively like...
No, usually I will come up with some kind of project that I want to build or that I want to test something. So like we were using the voice agent the other day for our co-opetition sprint, and I was like, okay, I've got an outcome that I want, and so I'm going to use this thing to try and get that outcome, and if it works for the thing that I want it to work for, then I'll use it, and if it doesn't, then I just end up reverting to whatever I was doing before. So in this case with the OpenAI thing, I wanted to make a new image of myself for my podcast. I wanted to have a photo of me with the text for my podcast next to it. And I knew that the alternative would be to get someone to take a photo of me, to put it in a tool like Canva, to make a background, to put a photo of me and put the image next to it. And what was acceptable was if I thought that the image actually looked like me.
Yeah.
And if I could tweak little bits, like my nose actually doesn't look like that. Here's some more photos of me so that you can get my nose right. And it like iterated to the point where I can look at the image and go, that's like a rough approximation of what I look like. It's not a photo of me. I don't think that it gives the I don't think it has soul. I don't think it gives the
Mm.
actual kind of feeling of the person. You know, like if you see a photo of somebody and they're like really just being themselves, it's quite obvious that it's that person. But in this case, it was like close enough that I was like, okay, well, shrunk down to, you know.
Can you walk me through your emotional state of deciding if this looks like me or not? That strikes me as such a fascinating point in like human history and self-reflection, that we're at this point where like this looks like me, and the self is trying to distinguish if it is close enough or not, and then being specific enough to be like, oh, actually no, it's my left ear, or my nose is 20% smaller, or like, can you walk through that a little bit? I'm very curious about that. I think this is a
Yeah.
worthwhile tangent.
What is the feeling? Let me tap into this for a second. So I think it's probably twofold. I think we have like a real natural reaction, and I think this is something that humans are really good at, is going like, oh, yeah, I like that. Or, oh no, like we just have a judgmental part in our mind. And we have the same reaction when someone takes a photo. Sometimes, you see a bad photo of you from a bad angle and you're like, oh, gross, that doesn't look like me. So there's that part of it, which is like, obviously that's a photo of you. I just look like that. It might not be what I want to look like, but I look like that, right, in the photo. So there's like that part of when something is generated and it doesn't look like you,
So
you have quite a
like
snap.
looking in the mirror in the morning when you're like, hang on, or like looking in the mirror after, maybe when you're on a little bit of medicine, so to speak, like 3 in the morning, you're like,
it's kind of
hang
like
on
that. What I would liken it to, like, I was using gut reaction for this one.
Okay. Yeah.
And what I would liken it to is if you
Huh.
see a photo of somebody who's not you, but looks enough like you that you have a double take, you go, oh no, that's not a photo of me. That's a photo of my dad, or that's a photo of someone else that is similar. But in this case, it's like, yeah, I think they're different dimensions. And I think we're going to start exploring this more and more. Like,
Interesting that your
what?
gut plays a lot of a role in you deciding which tool is working for you or not as well. That's quite an interesting insight. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
I can kind of relate as well. It's kind of like when I've been trying different tools, it's like, firstly, is the onboarding smooth? Can I achieve what I'm trying to do with another tool in a shorter period of time, higher quality, easier, like easy use? And I'm also noticing that some of my existing tools have been improving themselves as well. So I've been using Google Stitch quite a bit for design. Last week, its ability to change specific elements in a design was really quite hard, but they fixed that piece. And now you can go in and you can start to be much more specific, at least in terms of changing text fields and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to reassess the current tools that are evolving. And we don't have much of a track record with that with physical tools. Like, you don't have like a self-improving saw or a self-improving hammer. You can improve your relationship with it and your use of it, but the hammer doesn't fundamentally change from one week to another. So I'm finding that even feeling comfortable with these tools as they consistently emerge and evolve is a continual learning curve as well, because our ability to continually update our effectiveness with these tools is also a really important consideration. And understanding, right, at what point or how much time do I allocate to exploring new tools? At what point do I allocate retraining my skills on my current tools versus like actually just doing what needs to be done, doing the work? Yeah. And I think that
what's
we're on
your
more experimental side of this anyway, because we want to like push the edges a little bit. Sorry.
what's your current split? What are you finding works for you? Do you get tool burnout if you just try a bunch of different tools? Because I imagine this
Yeah,
would
I
be
like.
similar to other people. They're probably stuck in a track of using one particular thing and not wanting to invest the energy into trying something
So
else.
like, all right, this week specifically, there's been a few of our sprints where I've been like, all right, I want to not use Canva in this and try to implement this new tool in a sprint, which, when you've got a 45-minute time window, it kind of puts the pressure on the tool itself. But I haven't onboarded, I haven't learned how to do it. So there's like a learning curve within the sprints. I don't think that's necessarily giving the tool the best opportunity to shine, but it's kind of like trying it out in the trenches, and if it doesn't work, then throw it away and get the next one. And I feel more and more that that's actually the way in which these should be tested. I've probably got like, I'd say consistently, I've got capacity week on week for maybe 2 or 3 new tools a week. And that also is different if it's like a hardware tool or a software tool. I have noticed that hardware tools are a little bit slower to adopt because there's a bit more to like get them up and running. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I actually bought an OMI, it says OMI DevKit 2, and it's this little kind of recording device that you wear around your neck, and you can push a button and it will record voice notes or record conversations or phone calls. So, and then it kind of automatically transcribes and you can send it into your knowledge base and give you follow-up tasks. So it's a lot like these AI note takers that are on Google Meets and Zoom meetings, but you physically carry it around with you. And I've found that one, I haven't really set it up properly, so then I haven't really used it. I've tried to use it a few times, but then it's I probably need to spend another like 2 or 3 hours to get it properly working, and then it kind of makes sense. And as I'm exploring this tool, also, when would I actually feel comfortable using it? Like certainly for our work interactions, where there's a kind of an inherent understanding that our relationship, we can use voice as an input to effectively improve our effectiveness and efficiency. However, in work meetings, I often find myself asking if I can record phone call, but then still recording a WhatsApp phone call is actually still really hard to do. So this device could fill that gap quite easily. Okay. Yeah, but there's actually 2 tools that I explored this week that I wouldn't mind just sharing quickly, unless there's a piece
run me through it. My one piece here. Yep. Sorry, we have a little lag. My one piece here is I think there's some nuance in our sprints that we should adopt. That it's pulling from this learning that you've had is that like if we have maybe there's like 3 different types of sprints. So we have like a sprint where we parallel work. Yeah. The 45-minute really works. I think we need some kind of like new tool or new process sprint that is maybe twice as long and is basically how do we incorporate this new thing into our workflow, because that just needs to be given enough time and space for it to be effective, just because otherwise we're gonna we're trying to do 2 things at the same time and we won't do either well. Yeah. And then the third one is like some kind of joint sprint. We've been doing quite a lot of parallel sprints, and then we've been like free flowing in the way that we work together and like, we should position this like this. Like a lot of our strategy conversations are like not sprint like. And I think there's a space there where we actually carve out more time and set a couple of positive constraints that are like, we're not going to touch this, or we're not going to work on this thing. And the goal is to have like a closed endpoint that we're aiming for, like what we do with sprints. You know what I mean?
I like that. I kind of, when you're talking about maybe like, we've got the competition sprint as well, which I think is a important part of that sprint library. We have a library of sprints, but I like the full sprint, particularly if there's like a bit of a show and tell afterwards, so that we actually can explain to each other or explain to whoever we're working with, hey, look, this is the new tool I explored. This is what I was able to achieve. This is maybe how it stacks up with what I was doing previously. And then have a few like questions back and forth on just making sure it's not shit. Because I think it's very easy for us to get kind of caught up in our own, like, just like, we have bias around certain tools, but actually having an outside perspective, be like, hey, well, why don't we like poke holes in this a little bit, and being that kind of loving critic and be like, hey, well, have you considered this, or this or this. So I think maybe every week reassessing some tools could be a really important part of the process. Yeah. And then I'd say maybe part of that is also re-exploring how we use each tool as well. And I'd say this actually goes into maybe the conversation that we have in the deep dive later today as well. So I'm going to bookmark that and we'll come back to
put a mark in it. Maybe we even have a section in our pod where if we want to invite someone on to talk about a specific tool, to run us through it for 10 or 15 minutes, like this is the tool, this is how you use it, this is what I use it for. Or if one of us gets excited about a tool.
Yeah, Ty's tool time. I think you can invite anyone to that for sure. We have an expert, a toolster.
Toolster. And as I say that, we probably need like a soft trash can where every time we have one of these ideas, maybe that we can toss them quite easily because we both have so many ideas.
Yeah, I like a soft trash can, but the trash can that kind of maybe a trash can that reassesses itself after a while. I've been listening to a bunch of investors this week, and they're talking about something that we were been talking about 6-8 months ago around this idea of doing due diligence on all of your existing contacts. So one of the persistent issues that a lot of successful and high net worth individuals have is they have a lot of people approaching them with deals and investments and opportunities. And they're kind of in a situation where they're like damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they say yes, they have to look at everything and there's all this due diligence. And if they say no, we're kind of not a very encouraging place. So actually having a system that can go through and systematically like do due diligence on a bunch of these things. But a bunch of these investors are actually looking back their existing workflow and communications and seeing like actually where were the best investments made and who are the relationships that actually helped foster those. Yeah, it's super fascinating series of tools that are emerging there.
That is fascinating.
But just quickly, I wanted to touch on the actual tools I played with this week.
Okay, hit me.
So one of them is called Edge Gallery, and so Edge Gallery is an Android Google app that you can put on your phone or your computer, and then it runs local models. So it runs Gemma, it's got DeepSeek stuff, and then so you can run local LLMs. And I don't have a particularly high performing computer that I'm running everything on. Kind of use that as a positive constraint. I'm questioning that decision right now. So Edge Gallery allows you to run these local models offline. So if you want something to run on the edge, which is why it's called Edge Gallery, you can start playing around with these models. They're still quite basic, but again, like pretty incredible what Gemma 4 is able to do on a system like what I've got, or what you could load on your phone, and you could basically run a local model on your. So that was one of the tools I played with a little bit this week. A little bit slower, it doesn't quite have obviously the capacity of a bunch of these cloud models, but I think worth exploring a little bit more. I'm still much more compelled to put more energy into kind of Hermes agents and some of the emerging skills and tools that are coming through that community. One of the other tools that I'm actually really excited to play with, and I'm considering buying a new computer so I can do this properly, is OpenDesign. And so OpenDesign is a new open source tool that's emerged off the back of Claude Design. So Claude Design was something that I think you played around with last week as well, but has shown great promise in the design side of things. However, the cost to operate it is just prohibitive. So someone actually created an open source version of it that you can run locally. And I've been looking into the capabilities of that tool, and that looks incredible. So I'd definitely like to start playing with OpenDesign as a tool locally on the machine to really up the design abilities and capabilities that I have and we have as a studio. And largely because one of the things that I'm finding is quite hard is consistency of design. I feel because all of these models are kind of generative in their approach. Every time you're trying to create like a new page for like the same venture, it's quite hard to actually get that to be quite accurate. And it's kind of getting me to go back to things like Canva and Figma and doing them pixel by pixel. But then that just feels super slow and not where my best use of time is. So I think open design is something that bridges these worlds quite well, where you can have your component libraries quite refined and easy to draw from, and much easier to refine and then build on top of.
Have you tested this yet, or is it in the read about it, learning about it phase?
Yeah, I haven't tested it yet because I do not have a computer that can run it locally. I can run an instance through a VPS, which I'm considering doing this week. However, I'm also just considering upgrading my computer as part of that. And I was going to bring this up in the open questions piece, but I guess it could also belong in the tools piece. I'm running a Lenovo P12 Pro, which is certainly not designed for maybe some of the work that we're doing. I initially got it, as I mentioned last week, as a positive constraint, so I wouldn't be spending too much time on a screen. which is still fundamentally
Yeah.
what I would like to move towards. And it comes with a detachable keyboard, which is, you can see it detached here, and it's a tablet. So I do actually enjoy the touchscreen interface compared to like a MacBook, which I think I've tried to finger your screen a few times accidentally. But yeah, it's to kind of up the design output, which feels important at this point. I think I'm considering investing
Mm,
in new hardware on that side of things. Okay,
interesting.
those
I
are the,
also
those are the
wonder
tools for
if
me this
you
week.
do upgrade what the return will be and how quickly things move. All right, touching on the last tool that I've been using, I'm still on Claude Code, and I've been using basically the terminal and running something called Cline, which is just a way of orchestrating Claude Code so that it can be in a Kanban workflow, and that's working really well. I'm using 4.7 now, the latest model that came out, and I'm finding that it's much slower than 4.6. I think that it's doing a better job. I think it's more intelligent in the way that it's writing and structuring code. So probably all in all, it's better. But it does take longer. I'm
Mm.
seeing, yeah, it's just something kind of to be aware of and something to know. Also, maybe this should have come in the news section, but I read that OpenAI's 5.5 codex is somewhere between 49 and 94% more expensive because of how many tokens it consumes and because of the price increase. So we're seeing these large companies playing with the price of their tokens, and it has a real impact on how these tools cost. Yeah, that's about me for tools this week. Been largely sticking with the same ones, which I quite like. We do have an open question about we're using Notion as kind of a hub for information. If anybody has a really simple, lightweight, easy to use information hub that's an alternative to Notion, all ears.
Well, I think you should
Because
define what would make something easier to use than Notion. At
mm,
least from your perspective, I'm happy to weigh in on that as well.
yeah, there's a couple of issues copying large pieces of text. Like if I have a product requirements doc that has like a lot of information in it and I want it to sit in Notion, or if I have a transcript from a podcast and I want to put it in a page in Notion just so that I can refer back to it and it doesn't get lost in all the noise, then Notion doesn't allow you to copy those things. It will say, oh, sorry, the context is too large.
Mhm.
And the other part that I think is frustrating is that there are sometimes copying and pasting things, the way that it's structured doesn't quite work. And maybe it would be better to have it as markdown and just have the markdown, appear as what it's supposed to look like. And saying this, it kind of makes me think that we should just build our own version.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say usability is very much about like ingesting input from agent output, and like if you have a table you want to put into Notion, it is just like so exhausting to get that to format effectively. And uh, yeah, it like the amount of work to keep Notion looking good and maintained just feels more work than it's worth. So I have been exploring this with Hermes. So we already do have like a working LLM wiki that kind of tracks a bunch of our stuff in parallel. I haven't actually given it our entire Notion knowledge base to ingest yet, because before I do that, I want to set it up with a kind of a wiki output. And the shortlist I'm looking at so far is basically Outline, which is an open source wiki model that you know, maybe we could build on top of type thing. But yeah, if there's any other open source models that might support, definitely open to consider it. All right, building
Cool. Building.
or
Things we're building.
yeah, things we're building. It's the tools, from tools to building to rabbit holes.
So the first thing that we kicked off the week with was this voice agent. I think a big unlock for us was like, all right, what's the offer that we're giving? Really thinking clearly about what are we offering, what's the value of it. And not doing this agentically, I think, was quite a big thing. Like, yeah, we're using tools and like kind of structuring skills. Like I was talking to you about this skill that I produced with Claude Code that looks at different behavioral economics thinkers and then kind of gives recommendations about what the offer should be and what the price should be and all of these things based on all of this work that brilliant people have done over the years. Daniel Kahneman, Alex Hormozi, Robert Cialdini, and then you had a couple as well.
Yeah.
Just like brilliant thinkers that have spent a lot of time studying human behavior and a lot of time distilling this information for us. So that was super helpful. But then I think there's a piece that is, how do I feel about putting an offer out there and standing by this and feeling like I can deliver this and deliver like all the value that we say we can. And so building this voice agent out has been a really good experience in that respect, because I think we're at a place where what we're offering is really doable and valuable. And I found there are a couple of like tweaks that were really interesting. So I learned about there's a thing called Claude Workbench, and Google also has a version of this where you can go in and you prompt the model and get outputs and change the prompt and get outputs, and basically you're changing the way that you're interacting with the underlying model without having to run it through the API every time, so that when you have the prompt right, so that when you have the instructions right, and then all of the other pieces that it would touch or pull in to make sure that the service runs correctly. Yeah, getting it so that it's behaving how you want it to behave, which is something that I think generally people have a tendency to brush over, to go, that part will just sort itself out. But actually that does need quite a lot of engineering if you want a particular outcome. Yeah. Anything on the voice agent side jump out at you?
Yeah, I think I'd say, yeah, it feels like the focus this week has really just been on building out offering and pricing for some of our ventures. I don't know about for you, but for me it's also been part of this idea of like putting value to what we've built and what we're building. And I mentioned it, the rabbit hole I got stuck in last week around that, and actually like going back and to more, let's build out a framework to explore pricing outside of an individual venture, and just invite in some of the thinking, the thought leaders in that space, and some of the, I wouldn't call them gates, but perspectives that are worth looking for each offer was super helpful. So I basically built out another skill on my side to do a pricing framework, producing some really good offers to start off with. I'd be curious to see how they actually how the market responds to them in the next couple of weeks. So we'll have something to reflect on in a couple of weeks around that, or maybe we leave it for a good month or 6 weeks to see and respond accordingly.
Let's give ourselves 30 days. Let's give ourselves 30 days,
30
and we'll
days.
check back in around the 5th or 6th of June. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
There's a balance between like moving fast and not giving yourself enough data to work with.
Yeah, totally. And so, just to bring this back to super practical, when we're talking about pricing and offering pages, it's like quite literally a section on a website or a different page on a website that is a specific offer. So, this week we built out an offer for rural real estate agents for Landbook, which is essentially a product that allows any real estate agent to pull up quite a comprehensive look at the natural capital value of a parcel of land, which can help them actually secure the real estate listing in the first place, and then reduce the due diligence time frame for a buyer, at the same time as letting everyone involved in the process have more visibility of maybe some of the underlying value of the asset that hasn't typically been accounted for. And we're looking initially at real estate agents that are looking at selling properties for over 150,000 euros and over 5 hectares in size. And yeah, it's looking like we can pretty consistently show, particularly over a 30-year period, which is kind of what you should be looking at natural capital through the lens of anyway. It's like there's an annual value that we can get to, but then how does that play out over a 30-year scenario? And then what interventions or what things can you start to do with the land to continue to increase that value and that natural capital asset that you've bought? And at least initially, the feedback that we're getting from rural agents is like, wow, yeah, we don't have anything like this so far. So having a report or having a tool like this to bring visibility to these things should make all parts of their sales process much easier. So actually building from just a general land intelligence platform for any landowner, which is quite broad, to let's build this product specifically for real estate agents to help them secure rural listings, and then the sales process becomes a much more narrow product and a much more narrow offering and pricing structure as well. So pricing for individual agents, pricing for agencies, pricing for individual reports, that becomes quite straightforward.
Yeah. And it struck me too that these things are hard when we don't have a narrow person that we're building for or that we're pricing for. And then as soon as we narrow it down to like, this is exactly who it's for and at what point, then it's quite easy to say, all right, this is what we're offering. And in the offer, like you have two sides to an offer, obviously, very simplistically, there's some exchange of value one way and some exchange of value the other way, right? Like you pay me and I give you XYZ. And just to dig into like these kind of subsections, like when you list something on a website, and often you see this in SaaS companies, it'll be like, this is the enterprise plan, and for this plan you get these things, and they're usually bullets of whatever it is. Like digging into those has been really interesting. It's like, all right, well, like what is this point really about? Like what are all of the subsections in that, and how do you like fold the full service into a few points that are like easily ingest? I find that process really helpful because like it makes it really concrete. And it lets us kind of, especially with generative systems, and this is why they're quite bad at pricing, honestly, and why it's much better, much more effective, I'm finding when we just do it, is that a generative system will go like, yeah, for this pricing plan, you get this. And if you read through them and you think about it, you're like, well, what does that mean? It's like, there's, I don't know, I don't have a good example. It's like, you have door-to-door delivery for...
Yeah, exactly. All the generative systems add in other features at the point when you're trying to just give the offering. But then you could also, come on.
No, we do this. This is valuable in itself. It doesn't need to have 10 points.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's also something that we're going to see more and more. And maybe it's the thing that I see that is... that separates people that are really good at what they do from people that are just kind of, I don't know, fronting, is that often when somebody is pricing themselves, say they're a designer and they say, hey, I'm gonna like do this design process for you. It's really clear what's involved and it's really clear what's not included. And all of the most frustrating engagements that I've ever been privy to have this like murkiness. It's not clear what's included and what's not included. There are lots of parts of society where it's really clear. It's like you order at a restaurant, you order a coffee. It might come with a little cookie on the side or it might not, but that's like as much ambiguity as you get when you order a coffee, right? You know the price, you know what you're getting. It's often discussed up front, like how many shots of coffee will be in it. It's very explicit. And then when we talk about other things, and I think this is why it makes it so complicated when we talk about like AI is going to replace lawyers. There's so many different parts of being a lawyer that are not explicitly outlined to your average Joe. And even if you're engaging with a lawyer, there's so many different like aspects to it. Sorry, just little tangent, little rant there.
Oh, good. Rant away.
A question for you about Landbook. What
Mhm.
what kind of timeline should we have? Is it open to people? What are we needing support with here?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now we'd love support in getting this in the hands of rural real estate agents, predominantly in Europe initially, that are largely selling to foreigners, to English-speaking foreigners or foreigners that transact in English, so that at least we've got a little bit more visibility on these first reports and transactions that take place. And then once that happens, I think we can open up more of the bilingual side of things. Look at Portuguese, Spanish, French, German. I know you're really excited by that prospect. But yeah, just getting this into the hands of people that are selling land, real estate agents that are supporting that process, or people that are looking to buy land as well. So yeah, we can definitely support all three of those. Having said that, at least from our perspective, it makes much more sense to focus on supporting the rural real estate agents specifically because they deal with many of these deals and they have insights on, typically where due diligence is slowed down, or what actually helps a buyer make a decision or a seller show the value of the asset. Whereas for individual buyers and sellers, you don't typically do that too much in your entire lifetime. There's not a huge amount of insight to draw from there. But yeah, I think that would support our build right now for Landbook specifically. Rabbit holes.
Rabbit holes. Oh
Rabbit
man.
holes. I feel like this one's
I had
mine.
at
Like
least
rivers, rabbit holes. If we're going for alliteration, and I don't
alliteration.
know about you, but I do find myself in rabbit holes quite a bit. I used to think of rabbit holes as a bad thing, but more and more, I'm like, no, appreciate the rabbit hole for what it is. It's a beautiful place of kind of entanglements where beautiful things can emerge from. And
Mhm.
the rabbit hole I actually found myself in this week was with a couple of meetings that I was having with dog shelters, specifically animal shelters in Bali that typically look after placing dogs, is there's a huge kind of shift in how people interact with adopted animals in Bali. So it ended up being a bit of a rabbit hole, which, initially from Outlook, so like, this makes sense. So Animates is basically a an animal health assistant and platform that we've built. And so it allows any owner to, and even the idea of owner doesn't quite feel right, but anyone that's living with a pet, living with an animal, anyone that's living with an animal has this tool that can help them assist and look after the health of their animal. And that will help track the entire knowledge base of that animal, up to date reminders on all the kind of vaccines and different medicines that the animal might need, a chat interface to ask specific questions, an ability to log observations. And naturally, we thought, all right, if we can support shelters, dog shelters, this is a point where people are typically trying to figure out how to have a relationship with a new animal. And so that when you're first starting out, this is a tool that can probably be most useful. And in that process, actually having a kind of coming home guide. And at least in Bali, I met with the two biggest dog shelters on the island, and they're like, yeah, there's a lot less people that are adopting, and the ones that are just don't seem to use common sense at all anymore. Like two of the stories that I was told, two of the stories that I was told was, one guy adopted a dog, and apparently it was not a beach club friendly dog enough for him in the first week that he brought the dog home. And, this French guy was very upset with his adopted dog choice and basically returned it because of this. And, I think, anyone could understand from a common sense perspective that, but when you first have a new creature as part of your family, and particularly if this has been living in a shelter, so relatively confined spaces, it takes at least a week or two to feel accustomed to a place and a space, and the the general the general kind of guidance around this is like, don't try to do anything, just let them feel comfortable in the space. You don't need to take them out for walks, you don't need to like be overly engaging, just like give them space to start to feel comfortable and relax and acclimatize. And apparently there's just all these instances of someone being very excited with the new animal that they've got in their house, and they go out and do all these things, and then the dog will react with bad behavior, or bite someone, or which of course can be considered negative, but it's actually just the fact that you've pushed this poor animal to an extreme of where it's not comfortable, not really understanding how to be in right relationship with it. And so it struck me that this would be a perfect opportunity for Animates, but it's such a small number of adoptions, and yeah, So it's a bit of a rabbit hole. I think we'll still try to see if we can support, but I get the sense that we might actually be able to support more shelters in other parts of the world, like Australia and New Zealand and Europe, as opposed to the unique Bali side of things. Also, a lot of adoptions in Bali come through local Indonesian adoptees. I think it's like 2/3. And of that, most of them want male dogs because they're afraid of a female dog getting pregnant and then they have to look after the litter. And the feedback was that, having local Indonesians use another piece of technology is not likely to have a significant uptake. Yeah, bit of a rabbit hole on that side of things, but
Okay, interesting.
insightful,
But rabbit
insightful
holes,
nonetheless.
yeah, rabbit holes in this case, I think like the flip side of rabbit hole is a loop. Or like I think the distinction between them is that there's an endpoint, and at that endpoint there are learnings. Like these rabbit holes were only rabbit holes to a certain point, right? You like
Yeah,
got
exactly.
to the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we got to like either way, we got much more insight on how things operate here, which is just fascinating anyway. So, but I don't feel like we actually caught the rabbit at the end of it. But maybe we end up catching something else. But that's kind of the nature of rabbit holes.
Rivers,
Any
rabbit holes.
rabbit holes for you this week?
Rabbit hole. I've been actually yes,
Brilliant, good
but
man. He's human.
oh, definitely. So the rabbit hole yesterday was that I was trying to run a model on my computer that my computer wasn't fast enough to run. And so I ended up going into tech support mode for myself and going down a rabbit hole of tech support. Like, and while I'm here, I better fix this. And while I'm here, I better fix this. And you end up like, I think about it as opening cans of worms. I have a little bit of a tendency to just like, oh yeah, there's probably not that many worms in there, and then open up the can and all of a sudden it's like, oh man. But then I have this like real strong conviction that I need to deal with whatever's in the can of worms. So like I'm not going to open a can of worms and just leave it there. I'm like really going to try and fix it. And the frustrating rabbit hole was like going in and trying to figure this thing out, and eventually I think I caught the rabbit on this one. Eventually I got to the end of it and it was working how I wanted it to, but it wasn't 100% perfect.
I am very curious to know the answer to the origin of the expression can of worms. So I looked it up. And it appears to be that the earliest documented use appears in 1951 in an Illinois newspaper, and sources connect the image to canned live worms used for fishing, which kind of seems obvious in hindsight, but I don't quite so.
Maybe it's that when you open a can of worms, you have to use them all because otherwise they go bad, because it's not good to fish with dead, rotten worms.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, talking about creating a wiggly mess. Yeah, to start a problem that leads to many more problems.
I don't agree with canning live worms, but I would like to see a can of worms.
Well, be careful what you wish for. I might be able to make that happen. We could maybe do that live
this year.
All right, open questions. I feel like we've already spoken about a few open questions, but maybe we'll make this a quick pass. Any open questions for you?
Yeah, open questions for me right now. I'm sure there have been some, but they're not coming to mind. How about you? Any open questions?
Yeah, I mean, my big one is, and I don't know about you, but I find myself procrastinating slightly with hardware decisions. Like, I'm like, oh, I can't do something because I need a new thing, right? So I'm trying to decide, should I upgrade my computer so it can help me design more? The obvious answer is kind of yes, but it's always easy to say yes. However, yeah. I think if I can make an investment that's going to speed up and improve the quality of my work and output, then it becomes quite an easy one. And then it's like, all right, well, if that's the case, then what am I actually investing in? And I don't know. I haven't used an Apple product in probably 15 years now. And there's been a part of me that's just I've been more in the kind of ecosystem, which I've actually really enjoyed for the past 10 years for the most part. And yet now I might feel like it's time to come back to something that can actually.
What is the actual problem? What's the limitation?
So the limitation is not being able to use certain design tools effectively and quickly. So with what I've got right now, with this removable keyboard,
Yeah.
which I'm also missing a key, and ironically, it's the microphone key. But the mouse on this, its sensitivity is not very good for doing, close manipulation of designs and stuff. So I could easily, get a separate keyboard and mouse for that. But then that becomes just more things to carry around and more moving
stuff.
pieces to charge and break and all of that. And then the other part of it is actually just running models locally. Like I can't really run any model locally to produce anything of significance, and that's also been fine because I've been just running things on cloud and on VPS. However, having the optionality to actually build out a proper design component library and having an offline prompt library, that feels like a worthwhile investment for what we're building as a venture studio asset. And then also just to streamline some of my workflows as well. So it's not so reliant on being connected to the cloud as well. And I think longer term, that's
So you
going to
need
pay dividends and being able to just operate things locally at much more efficient costs and much higher speeds. Yeah. But ultimately, like I also want to invest in something that's not going to, I don't want to spend too much time on a screen. But yeah, I think this is at least the way I'm looking at it is like this might be the last computer I buy.
interesting.
This might be the last laptop I buy.
The
So
last
that's my
laptop with
open
a
question.
screen.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. I think it's really easy to spin your wheels on something that, for me, I'll speak personally. It's really easy for me to spin my wheels on something when I'm not clear about why I need it, and realizing this distinction between I need it for this and this is why I can't do it right now, and I need it because I want a new shiny thing and it will make me feel good about my work and I will work harder and more because I have this new shiny thing. And I think there's merit in both. I actually think when people like buy new tools and it means that they use them more, fucking great. My thought process is that you need something with I've got 16 gig of RAM on my machine, and that is just enough to run these models. It's kind of maxing out Claude Code, extra high reasoning, so extra high thought processing. And there's models are kind of going in two different directions. They're requiring more compute, and also they're quantizing. I think that's right. That they're like being shrunk down. So I don't think you need a lot more RAM than this, but probably a little bit more than 16. So maybe go 32 gig, or 24.
Yeah, I was looking at a one of the new MacBook Air M5 with 24 or 32 gigabyte RAM and probably 1 terabyte of memory.
That seems like plenty. Yeah.
Because it's worth, I guess, investing for whatever might else come down the line in the next 12, 18 months, which is still such a shame that the lifespan of a lot of these computers is still around that kind of time frame. Yeah, and then it's like, do you buy now or do you wait another couple of months when maybe there's another? Anyway, I don't. It's an open question for a reason, but I think that actually leads quite nicely to our deep dive, which is
Yes.
and we spoke about it a little bit, but I figured it would be really useful doing a deep dive today on this idea of loops and the difference between open loops and closed loops, and how the industry and I think at least the way I'm looking at this is how can we take open loops, convert them to closed loops, and get to a state where we have these systems and processes and insights that become kind of self-recursive or self-learning. And so that's kind of the definition of an open loop and a closed loop.
Yeah.
So an open loop would be much more around this idea of, all right, I input something, it processes, and then it outputs, and then that output just kind of it just stays open. It never really gets closed. So it just keeps the thread basically disappears, or the thread just is like that curtain flapping in the wind, like an open flapping curtain wind. Whereas a closed loop is the output will actually go back into an input, so it can start to improve itself again. And so even this idea of open loops versus closed loops in human relationships is really important. Like we typically like to close loops in how we communicate, and that's what makes certain things feel complete. And
Yeah.
having that in our working systems is super important. I don't know about you, but I
Yeah.
find myself using a lot of these generative tools, and I'll be working on a thread or a topic. And unless I can input it into a Notion wiki or put it into production in some way, that feels like an open loop that just kind of sits there, doesn't go anywhere. And I know that you've described this idea of open tabs in your mind quite a lot. So I think that's probably touching on the edges of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
what's coming up for you
to me, it's
with loops?
this question of optionality that open loops create options. We create something, we open a door, we do something, we open a tab. That is priced in financial markets, optionality, like you can buy financial options, like the option to buy something. And it's also a thing for humans, but optionality is expensive. Optionality is cognitively expensive. If I have lots of tasks to do, I have these background processes running in my mind, and I think I think I'm more sensitive to this than a lot of people. But I really see the design of these generative systems creating a lot of kind of open questions, open tabs, and that is really cognitively expensive. It takes a lot of energy, and there are lots of books that talk about this. Deep work that has a lot of reference to research about how context switching is really expensive from a like attention standpoint, from an energy standpoint. So like all of these generative systems are creating these things that just kind of go into the air. And so we've talked about bringing them back to have like, when you're working, you want something you can touch. You want something that is concrete, is there.
Mm.
And if we continue to, like in my own work, what I try to do is if I'm in a loop or if I'm in a cycle doing something, I try not to step away from it until there's like a concrete end of, sprint, end of thing, end of this is where we ended up, so that I can either open that again and continue on that loop until it's closed, or I can continue taking that all the way around until it's complete. And you talk a little bit about this idea of completeness as well, which I think is a different frame to finish, right?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, that's a distinction that I personally been practicing for the last year or so. So I was always told growing up, like, finish what you start. And I've actually recently switched that to be complete with what you start. And they're actually quite different. And I'd say, a sense of completeness comes from, kind of within you in many ways. And that doesn't always necessarily mean you've finished something. And maybe you've just done it to the best of your ability, or you've decided that, this is a rabbit hole and it doesn't need to be finished. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm complete with that. At least also there's this idea of being complete with something for now. Um, and I do think about this with some of our ventures. I was like, all right, we've got them to a point where they're kind of complete for now, and maybe they just sit there and in a bit of a holding space until there's another moment to either put more resources or bring on another partner or use one of the tools or the insights or the things that were built for that in some other way. So I think there's actually quite a few different ways to complete a loop, but it seems that the holy grail of our industry is largely this idea of self-recursive learning loop, particularly
Yeah.
with some of these agentic systems, where you're really building the system to self-improve, to self-repair, to kind of grow itself in many ways. And so this is the way a lot of the agentic designs are going. This is the way a lot of the agent swarms are going as well. So a swarm of agents is essentially, rather than having just one agent that does everything, you have a bunch of smaller agents that are orchestrated by like one kind of COO or managing agent, and each of them kind of feeds into each other. So you can see how they just kind of loop through each other the whole time. And so rather than relying on a human to consistently prompt or input or be the decision maker, you can kind of give it a goal, which is what's happening quite a lot these days. Is the goal is this, now start your loops to kind of get there. And yeah, some of the results are quite compelling, and some of them are just ridiculous, and some of them I think we'll start to see moving forward are probably quite dangerous in a lot of instances. And it's that old Isaac Asimov piece on in fact this might be a misattribution, but the idea of turning the universe into a paperclip maximizer. So if we
Yeah.
set this closed loop on making paperclips, I run a paperclip factory, and we run this closed loop on it, and basically, this system turns the entire universe into paperclips because it's become so good at self-recursive learning and just focusing on that one thing very dogmatically until the end of time. So I don't know, something in these
Yeah.
closed systems that also within a closed system, you need obviously some spaces for openness and reflection and input and refinement.
I also think about it as people, as like the people are recursively self-improving. And I like this idea that what you create creates you. And so when we are building things, they're also programming us. And you can see this in there's Pavlovian training in a lot of tech these days. You scroll or you do something, you push a button and you get a spray of confetti, and it's like, congratulations, you clicked the thing. And that is supposed to release dopamine that then changes your behavior. And that's what Instagram does. That's what TikTok does. It's little rewards for this swiping movement. And so I think about that, and that we can be recursively self-improving, or we can be recursively training, moving. It's not a given that it will be an improvement. And I think we see this with models. A while back was building a tool for a friend who runs a engineering business, and they wanted to be able to look at basically drawings and use computer vision to say, all right, there's this many manholes, there's this many pipes, they're this long, whatever it is. And when we initially talked about this, I was like, yeah, we can try. I don't know how good these systems are. Know how accurate the system is going to be at doing this. And so I built a V1. I gave it some training data at a very small scale. One night, I'm going to bed, loop on this, because Claude Code has a loop function, loop on this until you hit 95% accuracy. And it went and built things and tested things and went down different paths and basically tried all these different ways to improve this thing with what it had. And I came back in the morning and it said I stopped because I spent, 2 or 3 hours trying to do this and got to 65%. And I looked up the industry standard. There are companies that are using agentic systems to do exactly this and have raised a lot of venture capital. And they were getting 70% or 75%. And they have in their docs, hey, this technology is not really designed for this stuff. So this is the industry standard. And what we do is a guide. And then we need a human in the loop to go and review all of the stuff. The agent that I set up, I basically gave it an impossible task with the tools it had.
Good to know the upper bounds of it. As you were talking, what kind of came through on the loop side of things is actually environmental loops, and how when you have these kind of complex adaptive ecosystems, you'll have little loops. So for instance, you'll have the loop of the rainwater cycle, and then you'll have slightly larger loops where the rainwater cycle moves through other species of plants and animals, and how each of these loops interact with each other. So you've got these really fascinating interactions and quite complex relationships between all of these loops. Thanks, Butterfly. And he also talks about, you can also explore these expanding loops. So that if you've got a plant, it regenerates itself because it produces more seeds and offspring than the one in itself. So you've got these generative loops in nature and regenerative loops. And yeah, I think it's such an exciting space to play in. But actually what keeps a lot of these ecosystems healthy is when you have enough diversity in them. So if you've got say 2 species or 3 species in an environment, 1 or 2 will kind of take over and 1 will kind of die off. if you have 11, 12, 13, 15 species in the ecosystem, they all keep each other in balance. So it's kind of this constant tension between all these little loops together that actually keeps things healthy. There's this idea that diversity is important, but actually, like, diversity is crucial, and diversity of culture, diversity of species, diversity of thought, diversity of all of this is super important. So I'd love to explore how to embed that in actually some of maybe these agentic systems and swarms that we start to explore in the coming weeks. I'm certainly interested in it with Hermes, but at least for me, the insight now is let's put some more diverse agents in there as well. So maybe not just so focused on just the obvious ones like research and growth and finance and legal, but what if we put in a counselor? What if we designed it a little bit more like a Starship Enterprise, where you have like a relationship counselor agent, so it can actually help sort things through? And what if we had like maybe a kindergarten teacher? What if we had like a priest, some kind of religious figure in there as well that spoke to more of the philosophical aspects that were emerging through this? So yeah, I didn't think this conversation would lead to that part of it, but I kind of like it.
I like it too. I am wanting to continue on this for a second. I would like to see an agent of chaos in there, like maybe just
Yeah,
a
okay.
couple of them,
Yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, like an agent of chaos is like, I love the sound of it, and then practically I'm like, oh no, like what like just like so
yeah,
something
but
that breaks the system.
this is the thing. It would break the system, and then it would become stronger because of the broken system. There would be and it would have to be proportionate, right? If you have a whole society of chaos, you get absolute chaos. But if you are at a gathering, if you're at a party and there's one person that is just kind of stirring the pot a little bit, like,
so we can have maybe
in the
like
pool or doing something that's a little bit chaotic,
or a shaman. Yeah, we have maybe a shaman agent who's like chaotic in thought, but maybe not chaotic in action. But again, having said that, like I've certainly found, at least in working with my agents and prompts, actually having a red team and a critical perspective in there, and someone that tries to like break things and look at what wouldn't work is a really important part of the process of improving the output. So yeah.
And chaos, I want to distinguish chaos by, I don't mean chaos in violence. I mean chaos in unexpected. Like, I think that artists often are agents of chaos, or clowns are agents of chaos. They're like these things that are doing unexpected, that are adding unexpected elements to the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you could argue that the universe is chaotic. Many physicists and scientists do. However, in complex adaptive ecosystems, and this goes across all scales. It could be microscopic, it could be quantum, it could be vast universes. But there's this idea of strange attractors, and so a strange attractor could be a person, or it could be an event, or it could be a location that attracts seemingly unrelated input for something new to emerge. So emergence actually happens at these strange attractor points. And yeah, it could be an individual behaving in a very particular way, or it could be a very specific, like, I mean, it might not be that strange now, but, there's certain bodies of water that attract very disparate forms of creatures to the same place at the same point at the same time. And then, different things emerge.
Okay.
So the whole idea of a strange attractor doesn't even necessarily need to be that strange, but it could also be like a very destructive or chaotic event, like a wildfire or a hurricane, or I would argue that COVID for the global population was a kind of a strange attractor event, where so many other things kind of emerged off the back and through that in ways that are just not expected. So yeah.
Okay. All right, speaking of loops and closing loops, we've got a few things from the last week's podcast that I wanted to touch back on.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
We've already kind of touched on this. You said last week that you went down a rabbit hole of pricing this report, and you touched on it already. Is there anything else to say there, or is that a closed loop? Can we check it?
I would love to close the loop and say that, I feel like we've got a very good initial pricing and offering page to share with agents. and yeah, get some initial feedback and responses. One of the insights that came through in my research is you want to price something that at least 20% of the 20 to 30% of the market will say this is too expensive, but use it anyway because they see the value in it. Whereas if you've got 100% of people saying yes, it's too cheap, and if you've obviously got a lot less, then it's too expensive. I feel like we've got something that positions what we've got as a premium product with significant value, which of course it does have, and it does kind of show a layer of value that isn't really considered. The cost of the cost of the Landbook, is far outweighed by the value that it shows, and perceivably
Other way around.
in the value it brings to agents as well. So yeah, I'd say it's close.
Nice. Perfect. You asked me to smell 3 things.
Ah, yes. How are your 3 things of smells?
Honestly, that day, I don't remember what I smelled, but I was on my walk this morning and I decided that I should smell 3 things so that I could report back on this. And I successfully smelled things that were not flowers. I smelled a couple of trees, not a whole lot of smells. I smelled some wood that had been painted, that you had painted. Really nice. Would recommend. And then I kind of went on a smelling spree and I just smelled all of the...
Did you just say would recommend? You would recommend smelling wood?
Yeah.
Is that a pun I caught there, Ty Patterson?
Want to talk about this? Yes. Pun intended. Oh yeah, I went on a smelling spree, smelling all of the different surfaces on my walk home, from leaves to the side of houses, and good experience. I think it slows you down, but I would recommend going on a little walk and smelling as many things as you can. You might be surprised.
So there's also a pro move here, which is to take your nose to the object and not the object to your nose. So if you want to smell something on the ground, get down on the ground and smell it. Even the entire process of smelling shifts that as well. It's much more intimate smelling experience. So
Yeah,
if you want to one up your smelling experiences, well, that's great that you closed the loop on that. I have to admit I definitely smelt more than 3 things this week. However, they were much more like smelling things to smell if they smelt all right. Like, can I eat this?
Yeah.
Can I eat this? One of them was also the piece of wood that I painted, in terms of like, can I put this in my bedroom yet? Does it still smell like the coating that was put on it? Yeah. So loop closed naturally, but yeah, I'd love to make a little bit more time for the just indulgent types of smells, the curious indulgent smells.
Yeah. Okay. Loop closed. I like closing loops. Now,
this might be another section that
we've
loop
got
closed. All right.
Reminds me, this soft rubbish bin that we talked about, I think it needs a rebrand to a not right now.
I've heard that referred to as the car park.
Yeah, exactly. The car park.
The pocket.
It reminds me, when I was growing up, I went to this school where there was a car park behind the gymnasium, and it was the furthest place that you could go in the school. So if somebody was looking for somebody, I'd be like, oh, have you seen Steph? Yeah, she's in the car park behind the gym. And then they would go and check the car park behind the gym, which is just as far as you can go in the school. Tangent. That reminds me of something that Mum used to say. She used to be a flight attendant, and when someone was really kind of getting on her nerve, she used to send them to the far queue. So I mean, we could call it the far queue. And something about car. I'm not a massive advocate for cars, but maybe we can put it just in a park somewhere and just like park it. But this park could be like actually a really beautiful place in space that is kind of like a memory palace, but it's like a beautiful park. Okay. And so I really like this idea of having projects as trees. Like I think I've seen a couple of people build their own, like, where their GitHub becomes, it looks like a garden, and when they build apps or products, they grow as trees. So this could be the park, and when you put an idea in a park, maybe it has a recursive self-improving part that doesn't build the project or the idea itself, but it just collects information from the outside world about that. And maybe it sprouts fruit or does something when there's a trigger point, when there's you should revisit this.
Yeah, we could definitely figure that out. Probably for the past 10 years or so, I often use mind mapping as a bit of a tool to put out projects. I found one of the more effective mind map shapes to use is a tree. So understanding the relationship between, what is in the soil, what do the roots need, what creates like a solid trunk, and what aspects of the branches, and then what are the fruiting bodies of the trees, like what is the actual product, and the understanding the different relationships and inputs and processes and outputs. So I don't see why that isn't something that we might be able to design with some of our agentic friends that are emerging. All right, it looks like there's 2 more loops to close here.
Okay, we got 2 loops. Do you want to play a game first? Or last week we talked about a 10-year outlook that we were going to do homework on and come back.
Let's do the game first.
Okay. So this game, the loop to close is the Einstein Elvis Presley attribution game, which when we were talking about it this morning, you were like, I don't really understand the game. And I started trying to describe it and realized that it wasn't a very well thought out game. And in my mind, it was people often attribute things, and it would be funny if we bring a quote and then the other person has to guess who it's really attributed to. It felt like there was something in there, and we went, this doesn't really make sense. And so I want to pivot it to a slightly different game, but a game nonetheless. Am I explaining this properly?
Really? Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
great. What's the pivot?
So the pivot is, it stems from another game, and I'll briefly describe this one because I think it's really fun to play with friends. So the origin of this game is you're perfect person, and you have to decide whether or not you'll be with that person based on this thing. So as an example, River, this is your perfect person, but they have eyes in the back of their head as well as in the front. That's it.
And then, so the question is, would you still be with that person?
Would you be with that person? They're your perfect person, but they have this thing, and it's not going to change.
Yeah. Okay. And so we're adapting that for this instance with.
So this time we're going to play your perfect future scenario, so your perfect world, your perfect.
Right.
This is the future that we're going into, but it has this quality about it, and we have to decide whether or not we'd want to live in that future world. Okay.
All right.
If you go on.
All right, you go.
I go on.
Okay.
Your perfect future scenario, but there are no planes.
Oh, so you don't say what the perfect future scenario is. You just say you're perfect.
No.
Like the future scenario is perfect, but this is not available. Oh,
exactly,
okay.
because
for you, much easier.
For you, the perfect scenario could be very different to my
scenarios.
perfect scenario.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Great. All right. That makes this game much simpler.
I'm glad we're playing.
Perfect future scenario, but there's no flights. Yeah, I'd be cool with that because I actually would love to explore all the other modes of transport as well. I often think that this idea of getting to a place as fast as possible loses out on a lot of possibilities. Like I reflect on how a bunch of our ancestors used to get from one continent to another by slow moving boat. So they might take like 2 or 3 months to get from Europe to America, for instance, or God forbid, Australia or New Zealand. But that process of going from one place, like Europe to Australia or Europe to New Zealand, you form a whole bunch of relationships with your basically your peers. So by the time you land in a place, you already have a really solid set of relationships that you feel are kind of nested in some way. And by being on a boat, I'm not sure if you've spent any more than a week on a boat, but like it's a very intimate experience after a period of time. So I think we actually miss a lot with just this idea of these as my dad would say, I used to be a pilot, fast speed aluminium tubing experiences. So yeah, I'd be cool with that future scenario. All right. So I don't know why this came up off the top of my head, but your perfect future scenario, but it's powered by so whatever powers your lifestyle, it needs to come from. Okay, sure, go for it.
Yeah, like how long am I donating each day? Like what's the
it depends
how much.
It depends how much energy you want. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
to use my
are we like
phone,
so
my
the
computer
average like
to.
American lifestyle or the average maybe Asian lifestyle as variables?
Yeah, interesting. Nah, I
So
think we have to do a power to blood conversion because then you would have like an actual trade off. It's like, do you want all of these things? Okay, you have to donate for this amount of time.
yeah,
Let me
and
answer by saying yes, as long as I can maintain my current lifestyle by spending less than an hour a day donating blood and I don't feel like significantly drained. Maybe I feel like I've gone to the gym, you know?
okay.
What about for you?
Oh man, it feels quite matrixy, doesn't it? Like just plug into the matrix. I think this game will end up being quite kind of Black Mirror-ish, right? But yeah, I like this game.
That's
What
the
about
thing.
me?
I think it can go either direction.
Would I donate blood? Yeah, I'd like to think that I mean, put it this way: if you live in Asia, or actually, if you live in lots of parts of the world, you're already donating blood to the ecosystem by way of mosquitoes. So maybe the donation mechanism is a little bit more organic than this idea of like going to a place where you sit in a chair with like an actual donation blood type thing. You know, maybe there's a class of vampires that actually live amongst us, and they are the delivery mechanism for blood donations, and it ends up being quite a intimate sexual kind of like seductive experience. So I'm open
It is
to
your
those
perfect
possibilities.
future scenario.
Perfect future scenario, right? Yeah.
Okay.
I don't
Your
know.
perfect.
A nightly tryst with some vampiresses. I think I'd be okay with that. All right, moving along. What do you got to say?
Moving right along. Your perfect future scenario, but all currency is pottery.
What? All currency is pottery.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is there's no electronic payments, there's no cash, there's no way. Have you seen that movie, The Invention of Lying?
No, I have not. Maybe I have.
Okay. Ricky Gervais movie, basically
Yeah,
nobody
yeah,
knows how to lie. Everybody
yeah.
can only tell the truth, and then he can say things that aren't true, right? So what I'm thinking, or how I'm linking it to that, is like it's just a world where people don't know that you can exchange value in any way but with pottery.
Pottery.
So you
Yeah.
have to
Well, I
pay
mean,
for everything
I
with
feel like our
pottery.
ancestors were there in many cases, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah, I'd be cool with that.
Okay, good.
It probably removes a lot of trading though. Like, how much trading can you possibly do in a day with pottery? Like,
Exactly.
everyone would have to become their own pottery barn, basically, right? Like, you need to learn.
Big logistical burden, big inflationary burden, unless being a potter was illegal.
Yeah, but I kind of think that the implied slowness of transaction and yeah, kind of built-in obstacles for trade makes this probably a positive constraint in many ways.
Okay, one more and then we move on.
Okay. Your perfect future scenario, but you're living on a boat. You can't live on land.
Is everybody or just me?
Everybody. Yeah, just you out on a little stranded boat. So basically, the perfect, I guess I'm asking, is your perfect future scenario Waterworld? Are you okay living with Kevin Costner?
They're different answers for me. If it's Waterworld, I'm an absolute no, not doing it. But if it's that everybody lives on boats and we can also come onto the land to like do things, then yeah, that's fine.
Oh, so if we were on like an entirely ocean planet, you'd be like, no.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. But if we're on this planet, but we just live on boats, then yeah, I can do that.
All right. Well, I didn't. So you are firmly a terrestrian at heart. All right. I feel like that's some key insight here that I didn't know about.
Interesting. How about you?
Oh yeah, I'd totally be cool in a water world. Because I think you're
Yeah.
underwater and just the kind of structures that you create. I think if you scaled out this idea of water world, across 100 or 1,000 years, the amount of structures that you build and the inherent flexibility of our environment based on it being on water, I think would create such fascinating civilizations as well. So yeah, I'd definitely be all for it. Yeah.
Do you believe in Atlantis?
Do I believe in
That it
Atlantis?
was a real place? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that it was a society and it was a culture. I don't necessarily believe that it was underwater. I mean, it strikes me that based on some of the things that I've come across, that it's underwater now, but at the time when they were alive, I don't think that I don't think it was an actual underwater society. I think maybe they had a healthier relationship with the water world and understood how to be with it, rather than just like our global society kind of treats the oceans like a resource pool with very little positive. Yeah, exactly. You got that one. Very, very, very little positive interactions and relationships with it. So like, what can we continually take out of it? Yeah. And then what can we continually dump into it as a way to just like forget about it? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
There's this, I think this is a parking lot item because it could be a real deep dive, but this idea of invisible things in like putting rubbish in the ocean, say, makes it invisible to most people because the ocean is so vast and deep. Then there are like trash continents floating in the ocean, right? So I think there's a whole deep dive into how we make visible the invisible. And this also has to do with like time allocation. And there are all of these kind of like invisible trade-offs that we make. I think about it a lot with attention. For example, you're trading your attention, but you're trading your energy as well. You're trading all of these things that are not known ahead of time often, or that we don't see visibly. I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah. Well, this actually ties in quite nicely to my first question in AMA.
Nice.
If you're ready to get into AMAs. So this AMA comes from Kimi 2.5, a long-time listener. And the question is, you've described Lifetime as building 100 ventures over 3 years. At what point does portfolio breadth become a liability? And how do you decide when a venture is good enough to ship versus needing more time to bake?
Good question. Honestly, it's time allocation. It's resource allocation. It's energy allocation, really, for us. Like, we're two people and a bunch of agents building a portfolio. And I think breadth becomes an issue when we spread ourselves too thin. I think right now we've got 6 projects out or close to it. And what we're both realizing is that as customers are coming on board, there's all of these extra pieces that need addressing that were maybe invisible to us because we haven't done those specific roles. They're doing just technical troubleshooting, or there are we're building tech products. There are all of these different devices. All of the devices interact in different ways with our products. And so there are edge cases that potentially very quickly eat up a lot of your time. So I think it's kind of juggling these things, and our job to look at these bottlenecks and go to find where the sweet spot is for us. And I think that this continually kind of adapts, like the systems get better and the tools get better, and we implement better tools for different things. And then also we continue to build things and potentially have more and more products that are here under our supervision or stewardship. And it comes into this thing that we were talking about as we build things, and as an early stage studio, build things and then spin them out with people or agents potentially, who want to do the operations of these things. But it also strikes me that we're generally building things that we think are interesting anyway, Yeah. It's a little bit of a roundabout answer. Does it make sense to you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I think about this quite clearly in terms of, we're a venture studio that focuses on early stage venture, finding product market fit, and then getting into maybe the first stage of scale. Maybe it's 100 or maybe it's 1,000 users, depending on the product, and then spinning it up into its own venture and inviting other people to come in and kind of run it as their business, basically their venture, and then going to either a merger or an acquisition in relatively short periods of time. So, traditional VCs and exit cycles can be around the 7-year mark, whereas, we might be able to do things in, 12-month cycles, for instance. what complete looks like for us, I think is not running all 100 ventures over 3 years, but probably more like exiting maybe 5 ventures, being like involved in maybe another 15 ventures as more like advisory capacity and systems engineers. And then, the rest, I would say, probably sit in a park somewhere and hang out together. But that's kind of the nature of the beast, in some ways. So I think, practically what, that 100 figure looks like over 3 years is actually much more reasonable in terms of what actually works and what finds a fit. And rather than like trying to make sure every one of those is a success in some way. And even that part of the practice of like killing your darlings, I think, is a really important part of this process, because an idea can sit in here for so long, but until you actually get it out and share it with people and have it working in the wild, um, it's not actually worth it.
I think there are 2 points I want to make here. There's loop velocity, which is kind of the holy grail for startups, right? You read Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, and it's all about learning. It's like, how do you go from like building this thing, testing it, figuring out whether or not it works, and then doing these loops to make it better. And so I think we're getting much better at loop velocity for the learning piece. And also, as we're spinning things up, we're just continually learning like what the levers are and where we can just go down rabbit holes and spend a bunch of time that it's actually not valuable. And these are valuable in that their lessons, but they only retain their value if we actually learn the lessons and change our behavior because of them. And I'm noticing that we are doing that, which is really like a positive signal for me. If we were going and spinning our wheels on the same lesson over and over, spending a bunch of time, like we talked a bit about like design and pixel pushing and that kind of thing. And like, there's something to be said for tweaking things, but we have, like we talk about, the first things that we built that took maybe a month to get out the door versus what we're building now, which is like pretty efficient.
Totally.
Do you have another question there? I've got some in the background.
I do actually have a couple more questions. I have some questions from actual humans.
Hey.
Who I can't say are long-time listeners, but at least they're first-time listeners, or at least they first-time Instagram answer. Who I have one. Yeah, I have one question from a friend called Sean, which is, can a non-extraction future exist? Which is obviously quite a broad question, but certainly one that tackles our abundant futures direction.
Yeah, interesting. Do you have thoughts? Do you want to?
Yeah, no, totally. I've definitely got thoughts. And yeah, I mean, knowing enough about like healthy systems and healthy ecosystems, absolutely, the non-extraction future can exist. I actually think part of the answer in that is kind of what we explored in our deep dive today, and that's like actually closing loops. So, for instance, one of the biggest loops in human society right now is, there's two really big ones. One is the idea of trash or rubbish. And our dear old friend Buckminster Fuller was always a massive advocate for like rubbish is not like, that's a symptom of like an open loop that hasn't been closed. And then one of the other biggest loops is the nutrient loop, which is you have a lot of nutrients that goes into cities, and then that nutrients doesn't really go anywhere. It's actually quite literally flushed away. And that can be looked at in terms of 30 to 40% food waste, but it can also be looked at through human waste, which if we were actually in a closed cycle, our human waste would go back to fertilize the soil, much like other species. Their feces actually becomes fertilizer for seeds to grow. So that's closing some of those loops, knowing full well that basically our entire planet has very resilient non-extractive futures, largely because all of the loops connect to one another. You could look at one system in isolation and say that's extractive, but if you look at it in the grander scheme, it'll I feel like Mufasa at this point telling Simba, but it's the circle of life. There is a interconnected, exactly. There's an interconnectedness to it all, and I think once we come back to our understanding and being in right relationship with that again, our species, which we could be a custodial species on this planet. We have the ability to do that. We're not using our ability very wisely at the moment, but yeah, if we could become custodial species on this planet, I definitely see a future that is not extractive and a bunch of those loops are closed. And, the whole circular economy movement has been trying to explore this as well. However, I think the underpinning aspects of what an economy is generally based on is this kind of extractive nature of I have to extract value from one area to make money in another area. If you look at measuring externality of profit, like most companies are making money off the back of externalities that they're not accounting for, whether that's off the back of labor that isn't being treated well or ingredients that have been extracted in a way that doesn't create the environment for them to be replaced.
It makes me think there's a lot of things that we are not aware of, and so we don't think about it. Like if there was, say, on every trash can, if you put an image of trash in an ocean next to the trash can, and then some other nicer image of something being recycled, like it's a much bigger point and a much bigger problem to solve. But like if you just put that in the forefront for people when they were taking the action, I think about how we can like intentionally add these points of friction so that you think about these things as you go forward. It's a kind of cringy activity, but I've started every time I remember before eating, instead of saying a blessing or this is a blessing of sorts, is just naming all of the pieces of food or ingredients that went into what you're going to eat and where it might have come from and who was responsible for growing it and processing it and bringing it. And like to speak about it now once is one surfacing of it. But if you do it with every meal, very quickly you start going like, wow, there's a lot of work and effort and energy that goes into feeding me.
Totally. And I would kind of call that the abundance of spirit. And you're actually closing the loop on that abundance of spirit in a way by acknowledging it. So yeah, beautiful practice.
Yeah, and it helps to close. It's not every point in the loop, but it helps to close this loop that Sean's talking about or that you're talking about, prompted by Sean, is that if we don't think about all of those extra things, we'll let the curtain flap, right? We'll let the ends be untied, but the tying up loose ends, first of all, takes acknowledging that these systems could be closed and doing work to put in habits of, oh, this is where that thing comes from. Oh, where is it going next? It could go into landfill or it could go into something else. And that changes your decision-making process. When you are buying something, do I buy bananas with plastic on them or without? Like every single time, given the option, I will buy it without plastic. But it's not always an option, but like they're loops and they have timelines associated with them. And they're not only, there's the loop and then there's the feedback loop, which I think is an important part of this metaphor to bring into it.
Oh, totally. I mean, if you could look at our relationship with the planet as very extractive now, but if you look at it in terms of like millions of years of time scale, like it's how like you can't create or destroy matter. It's kind of just looped up in different ways. The archaeological record will certainly show some very strange objects from this period of time, for sure. What questions do you have for us?
So I have this question about exploring the agentic list week. So if we were going to run this as an experiment, what would be the most useful or the biggest leverage we could create without agents?
And where does this question come from?
This question is coming from Claude Opus 4.7. Long-time listener and participant, actually, ops manager, editor. It comes from our last podcast where we were talking about the challenge of doing an agentless week and how would we actually spend our time?
I mean, I've definitely thought about this since that piece anyway. For me, the answer is pretty straightforward, which is just meeting people. I'm noticing that having agents support with communication with humans is not particularly the ones that we know, is not really worth the time. So it's better off just reaching out and be like, hey, what do you think of this? Having conversations and just like keeping the agent out of it. Having said that, it is quite useful having being able to record the conversations and having them transcribed. But there's no reason that that could happen the week after. So we basically just collect all of the transcripts and recordings and then batch process them at the end of the week. But maybe that's a little bit of a hack. Yeah, for me, it would just be, it would be a week of outreach and relationship building. And yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I see that. For me, it would definitely be relationship building, but more, I think, decision making, or like having to go through the, I'll say, difficult process of making decisions with the information that we have. We already have so much information. We already have so much research. We already have a ton here that we could tap into.
Well, then I'd say, maybe the other way we can go is the complete antithesis of the agentic tech side of things, which is some time in a dark room or in a Vipassana where there's as little input as possible. So instead of like maximum input from all of these generative models, it's like a minimum input and then just connecting with yourself in many ways and the source of input, so to speak. And I certainly know, having gone through those experiences, there's a whole bunch of clarity that emerges from there. And, that clarity is very different than the clarity that you find after reading a research report or having a conversation with a customer. In fact, much, much, much deeper.
All right. My questions, honestly, really bad. I've been getting my questions from an agent, and the agent questions I'm finding not helpful. And so I'll ask one myself, and it's related to this.
So this comes from Ty, long-time listener.
This comes from Ty, long-time listener, participant. What is the top thing? What is the most annoying thing about working with generative systems right now? May 2026.
For me specifically, the most annoying piece is I feel like in every output there is 20% gold, 70% directionally accurate, and just 10% wrong. Turning those outputs into something that's production ready to feed into something or to hand off to you or to actually build from, that part is still super slow and arduous. And again, like taking an output from an agent and then putting it into Notion, like just even that process is painful. And then like editing it. I don't mind, obviously, the editing by hand. I think it's a really important part of the process. But the fact that it's just so hard to take an output and then edit it in a simple way to then have it refined or have it add, a library prompt or component that we can pull from at another point, rather than always generating from scratch again. That part of it's quite frustrating. And then even we're quite strict in terms of that. Here's the markdown file for this venture. This is all you need to know about it. Can you please output based on this, this, and this? And if your prompt isn't strong enough and accurate enough, there'll still be kind of scope creep in the generative output. So yeah, in short, generative models are creepy. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I just having kind of a vivid imagination, like to explore and be curious about things anyway. So it kind of indulges those characteristics in me, which then makes me creepy. So I don't want to be creepy in any way, shape, or form, except for Halloween. Every now and then, like, you can be a little creepy. I think it's important.
I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. Yeah. To answer the question, I would also echo this, that there's just some lies that creep in there. There's it's hard to build trust with something, with anything, with a person, can you imagine if you had a friend that 10% or 20% of the things that they told you were just outright lies? And when you question them on it, they double down on it. They're like, oh yeah, I was definitely a professional motocross rider. Even if it's one thing out of all of the stuff that you talk about, it's How am
Yeah,
I supposed to trust this working
but you know,
relationship?
like, but what is a lie, right? Like, I mean, is an embellishment a lie? And like, yeah, or
So
like, is not saying something also a lie? Like, what? So, you know, because I would argue that probably say, you know, and like, is social media is like, I'd see that as a form of lying as well, because you're only presenting, you know, one side of who you are in many ways these days. So, yeah, I mean, I would kind of say that a lot of our relationships, personal relationships, are now kind of based in this layer of maybe not directly lying, but at least,
semi-truth.
yeah,
Yeah,
filtered through
yeah, I
crap.
agree. But I think that in relationships where you're making decisions based on the information, if it's entertainment, whatever, if it's not impacting your decision making, but in a working relationship, it's impacting the things that you do, or in a friendship, or in a
No, but all
romantic
right,
relationship, it's
let's take it
impacting.
romantically. Yeah, I mean, like this idea of like being brutally honest. Like, I mean, I think that, you know, this idea, you know, Alan de Botton, who's an author, has written. He had one of the most popular articles in New York Times one year, and his whole article was basically, "You will marry the wrong person," and the thesis of it was basically, you'll marry the wrong person because you're not upfront about what makes you crazy. In this whole game of dating, there's like all of the other things that you put forward as opposed to just the authentic, honest truth. Like, I'm crazy because of this. What makes you crazy? Can we live with those crazies? All right, that is those create the conditions for a healthier relationship there. Whereas, you know, most of us, you know, wait for, you know, years until the craziness starts to creep out a little bit, which is such a shame in many ways. And yeah, maybe there's something in this as well. But yeah, all right.
I agree. I think it's nuance.
There's a deeper nerve here.
That's the thing, though. There's so much nuance, and when we're talking about regenerative systems, sorry, when we're talking about generative AI systems, I'll be specific because we were talking about regenerative systems earlier, and I misspoke. When we're talking about generative systems, we are constrained by a context window. And although that is getting bigger, like there's so much nuance in all of these conversations that we have that it's, I think, worth pointing out that there's a difference between like all of the nuance that we could go into around lying and trying to get to a specific answer for a decision to make. And if that is not, at least when we're working with AI systems, and I'm saying like it's the 6th of May right now, because I think this stuff will change. But right now, this is the case that we don't always get honest answers.
I don't know. I'd say that, you know, these models reflect both humans individually and collectively right now. You know, I'd say most people's interactions are probably 20% gold, maybe, you know, 70%, you know, directionally okay, and then 10% just bullshit, which I don't know, somehow feels quite accurate. And obviously that scales up and down, but you know, like that's probably the medium of most people's relationships with themselves and each other.
Interesting. Something to ponder.
Yeah, these generative systems are trained on, you know, largely us, and you know, maybe it's a little bit higher because it's trained on, you know, Reddits and social media things. I know, you know, we're obviously moving to models now that are based on synthetic systems, but you know, it's still underlying that is based on the principles and values of, you know, developers, things that,
And
you know, people that
the
largely, you'd argue, that probably don't have the healthiest relationships with themselves or each other because they're spending that much time on a screen building these things.
I agree with you on some of this. I do think that it's engineered though, that these systems are engineered to have branching, to want more use. Like every chat interface that you use asks you a
Yeah,
question at
yeah,
the end
a
of it,
follow-up question. Yeah, exactly.
you know, to be continued.
Yeah, I feel like we should leave this now with a follow-up question at the end. What's like, to close out this episode? What would be a question that a generative model might leave the listeners with?
No,
Do,
no, no, no.
do you
We've had
do
all
you
this
want this?
discussion about loops.
Do you want this? Do you want this in a 15-page PDF report?
No, River, closed loops, closed loops.
All right. How
Okay,
would you
I'm
like
going
to
to
close
answer
them?
both of those questions. To close the loops, I'll answer these questions and we'll close with a statement. Okay. So, first of all, to answer these questions, no, I don't want a 15-page PDF report. right now for this conversation. I'd rather listen to it. I don't remember the second question. Well, I guess that one's an open loop. And the statement, do you have one that comes to mind? Otherwise, I've got a...
You would have I'd say we finished so my thoughts are we finish an episode with some ridiculous movement of sorts that listeners can't see, or we finish it with some ridiculous open question that a generative AI model might use, or we could finish it with a statement or a quote, potentially a misattributed quote.
Okay, how about a quote that doesn't have attribution and leave it up to anybody anybody, including a AI agent, to interpret. And I love the idea of an image. But I mean, sorry, so I'm going to hold up a certain number of fingers and you're going to hold up a certain number of fingers, and that total is a number. And that's the movement.
But what does that number signify?
How
about we just close with a high five? Exactly. I like that. That feels like a good way to close. All right. Well, let's both finish with a quote.
All right. Mine is there's a long backstory, and I think if somebody has made it to hear this, they should look it up. But the quote it was carved into a log. And there's somebody lying in the log, and they look over, and they're on this long journey, we'll say. And they look over and they see carved into the log, "Remember who you are. There is no finish line."
And mine comes from a very famous doctor. And maybe it's not so much a quote, but a line from something they once wrote, which is, "The places you will go."